Most people who kill try everything to avoid being caught. They destroy evidence, build alibis, deny everything in court, and lie until the last possible moment. That is the expected behaviour of someone who has taken a life and wants to keep living. But every so often, someone does the opposite. Every so often, a killer walks into a police station voluntarily, or sits down in front of a camera and tells you exactly what they did and how they did it, or stands in open court and walks a judge through 10 murders one by one in the same flat voice they might use to read off a grocery list. This video covers 10 serial killers who confessed on camera. Some did it to save their lives. Some did it because a detective spent years earning their trust. One did it with physical evidence still in his jacket pocket. And one did it the night before he was scheduled to die, with the lights flickering as the prison tested the electric chair in the room next door. Case 1. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. On the morning of January 15, 1974, 15-year-old Charlie Otero came home from school in Wichita, Kansas, and walked through the back door of his family's house. His mother's purse was on the stove, flipped upside down, things scattered everywhere. That was not like her. She was a tidy woman. He called out. No answer came back. He walked down the hallway to his parents' bedroom and found his mother, Julie, tied up on the bed. His father, Joseph, was on the floor. A chaplain at the police station told him later that his 11-year-old sister Josephine and his 9-year-old brother Joey were also dead. All 4 of them were gone in a single morning, while Charlie and his other siblings had been sitting in school. Charlie Otero said later that it felt like someone had ripped his chest open and torn his heart out. The man who killed them was Dennis Lynn Rader, a 28-year-old from Wichita who had been planning the attack for weeks. He had stalked Julie Otero after recognizing her as a former co-worker from the Coleman Company, where they had both worked in the early 1970s. He cut the phone lines before entering. He forced his way in through the back when 9-year-old Joey opened the door to let the dog outside. Rader would go on to kill 6 more people over the next 17 years, terrorizing an entire city while living among them as a neighbor, a husband, a father of 2 children, a church congregation president, a Boy Scout troop leader, and a compliance officer for the city of Park City, Kansas. He gave himself the name BTK, bind, torture, kill, and mailed it to newspapers himself so the world would know what to call him. Nobody suspected him for 31 years. Dennis Lynn Rader was born on March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas, the oldest of 4 sons. He grew up in Wichita, in what appeared from the outside to be an ordinary household. He joined the Air Force after high school, served, came back to Wichita, found work, and in 1971 married a woman named Paula Dietz at Christ Lutheran Church. They had 2 children, a son named Brian and a daughter named Kerry. Rader later said in interviews that he had developed violent sexual fantasies involving bondage from a young age. As a kid, he hanged stray animals. He cut photos of women out of magazines and drew ropes and gags on them. He imagined restraining and controlling people, and he later admitted that these fantasies never went away. They grew. By the time he was in his late 20s, he had started thinking about acting on them. He referred to potential victims as projects. He gave each one a code name. The Otero family attack was not a spontaneous decision. Rader had spotted Julie Otero months earlier and began watching the family, studying their routines, noting when the children left for school, learning who came and went from the house. On the morning of January 15, 1974, while his wife Paula slept, he packed what he called his hit kit: rope, guns, knives, tools for breaking in, and walked to the Otero residence. He had planned to find Julie and the 2 younger children at home. He did not expect Joseph Otero, the father, to still be there. That detail rattled him, but it did not stop him. He told the family he was a wanted man from California who needed food, money, and a car. He ordered them at gunpoint into a bedroom. He bound all 4 of them with rope he had brought from home. He suffocated Joseph with a plastic bag tied at the neck. He did the same to Joey. He strangled Julie. At one point she regained consciousness and he strangled her again because he had not killed anyone before and was not certain she was dead. Then he took 11-year-old Josephine down to the basement. He undressed her, tied a noose around a sewage pipe, and hanged her. Before he did it, she asked him what was going to happen to her. He told her she was going to be in heaven with the rest of her family. He stayed and watched her die. He then took Joseph Otero's wristwatch and a radio from the house, got in the family car and drove it to the parking lot of a nearby grocery store. He walked home. That afternoon, Charlie Otero found them. What makes the years that followed so disturbing is not just that Rader kept killing. It is that in between the killings, he went home. He sat at the dinner table with his wife and children. He installed security alarms for homeowners in Wichita, some of whom were afraid of the BTK killer, and he did his job so carefully that his co-workers nicknamed him the Blue Book Man because he followed every rule and never cut corners. He went to church every Sunday. He led Boy Scout camping trips. He voted in local elections. He served on neighborhood committees. And when the urge became too strong to ignore, he went back out. On April 4th, 1974, less than 3 months after the Otero murders, Rader broke into the home of 21-year-old Catherine Bright in Wichita. He had spotted her and labelled her Project Lights Out. He did not know her 19-year-old brother Kevin also lived there. When the siblings came home together, Rader held them at gunpoint, had them tie each other up, and then separated them into different rooms. Kevin managed to get free and fought back. Rader shot him twice, and Kevin ran from the house and survived, making him the only person to escape a BTK attack. Catherine was not as lucky. She fought hard. Rader later told detectives she fought like a hellcat, but strangulation was not working, and he stabbed her 11 times. She died. Kevin survived but carried a bullet wound and the memory of that afternoon for the rest of his life. Rader went quiet for nearly 3 years after that. His wife Paula gave birth to Brian in 1975 and Kerry in 1978, and Rader later admitted the demands of having young children at home limited the time he had to stalk victims. He filled those gaps with self-bondage, photographs of himself in restraints, and journals detailing his fantasies. In March 1977, he came back. He forced his way into the home of 26-year-old Shirley Vian, who had 3 young children at home. He locked the children in the bathroom and barricaded the door with a chair so they could not get out, then strangled Shirley Vian to death while they screamed on the other side of the wall. 9 months later, on December 8, 1977, he broke into the home of 25-year-old Nancy Fox, who lived alone, and strangled her with her own belt. The next morning, he called the police from a payphone to report the homicide. The call was recorded, and the recording was released to the public in 1979 in the hope that someone would recognize the voice. Nobody did. By the time Rader killed Maureen Hedge on April 27, 1985, he had been living on the same street as her in Park City for years. She was 53 years old. She had spent that evening playing bingo with her boyfriend. Rader abducted her from her home that night, strangled her, moved her body to Christ Lutheran Church, the church where he served as congregation president, where he posed her and took photographs. Her body was found in a ditch 7 miles from her home 8 days later. The following year, on September 16, 1986, Rader dressed as a telephone company repairman and knocked on the door of 28-year-old Vicky Wegerle. He had been watching her through the windows of her house, listening to her play piano, and had given her the code name Project Piano. Her 2-year-old son was home when Rader strangled her with a nylon stocking, stole her car, and left. Her husband Bill came home for lunch and found her. For nearly 18 years, some in the community suspected Bill Wegerle of killing his own wife because police had no other leads. He lived under that suspicion until 2004, when Rader himself sent a letter to the Wichita Eagle claiming responsibility and including photographs of Vicky's body and a copy of her stolen driver's license. His final victim was 62-year-old Dolores Davis. On January 19, 1991, Rader threw a cinder block through her sliding glass door, broke into her home, bound her, and strangled her with pantyhose. He placed a mask on her face and left her body under a bridge. A 15-year-old boy following his dog found her on February 1, 1991. After that, Rader stopped. He had a new job, compliance officer for Park City, and the responsibilities that came with it. He was also finishing his degree at Wichita State University in administration of justice. The city of Wichita spent the next 13 years believing BTK was either dead, imprisoned for something else, or simply gone. He was not gone. He was attending church. In January 2004, the Wichita Eagle published a story marking the 30th anniversary of the Otero murders. The headline read, "BTK Case Unsolved 30 Years Later." Rader read it and later told investigators he was, in his own words, kind of bored, so he started writing letters again. Over the next year, he sent packages to local television stations and newspapers, letters describing his crimes, chapter headings for a book about himself he wanted written, photographs, a Barbie doll with its hands and feet bound and a plastic bag over its head, and a copy of Nancy Fox's driver's license that he had kept for 27 years. In January 2005, he made the mistake that ended everything. He sent a letter asking police whether a floppy disk could be traced back to him if he used it to send a message. Law enforcement placed a classified advertisement in a local paper telling him it was safe. He sent the disk. The metadata on it pointed directly to Christ Lutheran Church. Further checks connected it to a deleted Word document, last modified by a user named Dennis. Within days, investigators ran a DNA comparison between a pap smear from Rader's daughter Kerry, which they obtained from a medical facility, and semen found at the Otero crime scene 31 years earlier. The familial match was enough. On February 25, 2005, police pulled Rader over near his home in Park City just after noon. An officer asked if he knew why they were taking him downtown. Rader replied that he had suspicions. On June 27, 2005, Dennis Rader stood in Sedgwick County District Court in front of Judge Gregory Waller, cameras rolling, and pleaded guilty to all 10 counts of first-degree murder. What followed was unlike almost any other moment in American courtroom history. Judge Waller began asking Rader to describe each murder for the record. Rader complied. He stood at the podium and walked through all 10 killings in a flat, clinical voice, explaining how he had entered each home, what he had said to the victims, what he had used to bind them, how long it had taken. He described the Otero murders. He described strangling Julie Otero and not being sure she was dead. He described taking Josephine to the basement. He used the word projects when referring to his victims. He said he had tried to make Joseph Otero comfortable because the man had a cracked rib from a car accident. He answered the judge's follow-up questions the same way a person might answer questions about a work meeting. No tears, no hesitation, no visible emotion at all. The surviving Otero children sat in that courtroom and listened to the man describe murdering their parents and their little sister and brother as if he were recounting a schedule. Charlie Otero buried his face in his lap and cried when prosecutors put a photograph of Josephine on the screen. Rader was sentenced on August 18, 2005. Because Kansas had not had the death penalty in place at the time, most of his murders were committed. Execution was not an option. Judge Waller sentenced him to 10 consecutive life terms in prison, the maximum allowed under Kansas law, requiring him to serve a minimum of 175 years before any possibility of parole, which in practice means he will die in prison. At the sentencing hearing, Rader gave a statement that the prosecutor compared to an awards acceptance speech. He expressed hope that the victims' families would one day forgive him. Carmen Otero, who had been 13 years old the day she came home from school and used a fingernail clipper to try to cut a gag off her mother's face, sat in the courtroom and heard that. Paula Dietz, the wife who had known nothing, was granted an emergency divorce on July 26, 2005, with the normal 60-day waiting period waived. The family home in Park City was demolished in March 2007. Dennis Rader is currently 80 years old and is incarcerated at El Dorado Correctional Facility in El Dorado, Kansas, where he has been since August 2005. He has given interviews to researchers and documentary filmmakers from inside prison. His daughter, Kerry Rawson, whose medical records were used to identify her father as a serial killer, has spoken publicly about the day FBI agents showed up at her door to tell her what her father was. She wrote a book about it in 2019. In 2025, Netflix released a documentary called My Father, the BTK Killer, in which she appears. She has said she believes her father likely killed more than the 10 people he was convicted of murdering. The three older Otero children, Charlie, Danny, and Carmen, found their family on January 15, 1974. Their parents were 38 and 33. Josephine was 11. Joey was 9. There are no holidays, no family gatherings, no milestones in the decades since that morning that do not carry the weight of what Dennis Rader chose to do before they got home from school. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Samuel Little confessed to 93 murders on camera, describing each victim in detail from memory, decades after he killed them, and the FBI confirmed every single confession was credible, making him the most prolific serial killer in American history, a title that had belonged to no one before him. Case 2. Samuel Little, America's most prolific serial killer. On September 5, 2012, police officers walked into a homeless shelter called Wayside Christian Mission in Louisville, Kentucky, and arrested a 72-year-old man sitting quietly inside. His name was Samuel Little. The charge was a drug offense, an outstanding narcotics warrant out of Los Angeles. He was taken in without incident, cooperative, calm. Nobody at that shelter knew who he was. Nobody in law enforcement fully knew yet either. Within 2 years, a jury would convict him of 3 murders. Within 6 years, he would confess to 93. Samuel Little was born Samuel McDowell on June 7, 1940, in Reynolds, Georgia, a small town about 100 miles south of Atlanta. His mother was a teenager who, by his own account, abandoned him shortly after birth. He was raised by his grandmother in Lorain, Ohio, a working-class city on the shore of Lake Erie. He dropped out of school early, struggled to hold down work, and by the time he was a teenager, he was already being arrested. In 1956, at 16 years old, he was held in the juvenile institution in Nebraska after a breaking and entering conviction. His mother's location on the booking card was listed as whereabouts unknown. The arrests kept coming. By 1975, Little had been arrested 26 times across 11 different states for crimes including theft, fraud, armed robbery, aggravated assault, and rape. He served a combined total of roughly 10 years across various sentences for these offences, but was released each time. He moved constantly: Florida, California, Mississippi, Texas, Ohio, Louisiana, working occasional jobs as a cemetery worker and ambulance attendant, and supporting himself and his long-term girlfriend largely through shoplifting. He described himself in interviews as a former prize fighter, having taken up boxing while in prison. He was physically powerful, with large hands and enormous upper body strength. He used those hands to strangle people. He told investigators later that he first felt the urge to choke someone when he was 7 or 8 years old. He never explained what caused it. He simply said the desire was there, that it never went away, and that eventually he acted on it. According to the Washington Post, which conducted one of the most detailed investigations into his case, authorities believe his first victim was Mary Brosley, a 33-year-old mother of 2 from Massachusetts, who had left her family and was struggling with alcohol addiction. Little met her at a bar in Miami on New Year's Eve 1970. She weighed barely 80 pounds. She was estranged from her family and had been living on her own, disappearing from the people who had known her. When Little strangled her in his car on a dark road near Miami that night, nobody came looking. Her family would not learn her name had been connected to Samuel Little until decades later, after he was already in prison confessing to everything. That was his strategy, and he knew it. Little later told investigators and journalists that he specifically chose women who he believed would not be reported missing and whose deaths would not be investigated. He said plainly that he stayed in the ghettos and never killed senators or governors or fancy New York journalists. His victims were overwhelmingly black women, sex workers, drug addicts, homeless women, women living far outside any safety net. When their bodies were found, many of the deaths were not classified as homicides at all. Because Little used only his hands to strangle, no weapons, no stab wounds, no bullets, and because strangulation can cause petechial hemorrhaging that might be missed by an overworked coroner, cause of death was often listed as a drug overdose, an accident, or undetermined causes. Some bodies were never found. Some women simply vanished and stayed vanished. He killed across 19 states over 35 years. He killed in Los Angeles and Miami and Cleveland and Las Vegas and Memphis and New Orleans. He killed in small cities and large ones, in motels and cars and abandoned buildings. He would meet a woman, offer a ride or company or drugs, drive somewhere isolated, and strangle her with his bare hands. He told one set of investigators that he sometimes made the process as long and slow as possible, letting women drift in and out of consciousness. He was never flagged as a serial killer because no one was connecting the dots between a dead woman in Mississippi and a dead woman in California and a dead woman in Kentucky. Nobody was looking for the thread because nobody believed there was a thread. In 1982, Little was arrested in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and charged with the murder of 22-year-old Melinda Rose Lepre, who had gone missing that September. A grand jury declined to indict him. He was extradited to Florida and tried for the murder of 26-year-old Patricia Mount. Prosecution witnesses identified him, but their testimony was considered unreliable, and he was acquitted in January 1984. In 1984, in San Diego, he was arrested after 22-year-old Lori Barros reported he had kidnapped, beaten, and strangled her. He was also found by police in his car with an unconscious woman. He served a 2.5-year sentence for those assaults and was released in 1987. He moved to Los Angeles. That same year, he murdered Carol Alford, 41, then Audrey Nelson, 35, in 1989, then Guadalupe Apodaca, 46, in 1989. All 3 women were found stripped below the waist, Alford in a back alley off East 27th Street, Nelson in a dumpster behind a restaurant, Apodaca inside an abandoned auto repair shop after a boy kicking a soccer ball against the outside wall looked through the window and saw her. All 3 had been strangled. All 3 tested positive for cocaine during autopsy. Little maintained his innocence and kept moving. He was not connected to those 3 murders for another 25 years. The break came in April 2012 when LAPD detective Mitzi Roberts received a notification from a database. A DNA match had come back linking an old crime scene sample to a man named Samuel Little. More matches followed. When police found Little at the Louisville homeless shelter that September, they had enough to charge him with 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was 72 years old. He arrived at Los Angeles Superior Court in a wheelchair. He shouted that he did not do it when one of the victim's family members addressed the judge. On September 25, 2014, the jury convicted him of all 3 murders after deliberating for 2 hours. The semen and DNA evidence from 2 of the victims was so precise that the chance of a random match was 1 in 450 quintillion, prosecutors told jurors. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms in prison without any possibility of parole. He continued to insist he was innocent. His appeals went nowhere. The California Supreme Court refused to review his case in May 2017. Then, in the spring of 2018, a Texas Ranger named James Holland came to interview him. Holland had been asked to speak with Little about the 1994 murder of Denise Brothers, a 32-year-old mother of 2, whose strangled body was found in Odessa, Texas. Holland believed Little might know something. When Holland walked into the interview room at the California State Prison where Little was being held, Little spent the first 30 minutes raging at him, furious about being labelled a rapist in court documents. Holland listened. He did not argue. Holland later said he went in with complete confidence that Little would confess, and that he was right to have it. The 2 men struck an unusual dynamic. Holland called him Sammy. Little called him Jimmy. They ate grits together. They talked. In exchange for being transferred out of the Los Angeles County facility, Little began to confess to murders. He did not stop for more than 2 years. Over more than 700 hours of videotaped interviews that began in June 2018 and continued until shortly before Little's death, he described 93 murders in 19 states, committed between 1970 and 2005. The FBI published many of these confession videos directly on its website, fbi.gov, where they remain available. In them, Little sits and speaks with the calm and specificity of someone recording a long road trip. He describes the woman's hair, her height, the colour of her skin, the bar where he met her, the road where he drove. He does not cry, he does not apologize. He sometimes says he loved certain victims, meaning he found them attractive. His memory for details about the women, their faces, their builds, where he picked them up, was described by Holland as a photographic memory. His memory for dates and distances was less reliable and sometimes off by years or hundreds of miles, which investigators acknowledged when reviewing his confessions. Holland gave him art supplies. Little, who had no formal training, produced hand-drawn portraits of his victims from memory, 26 of them, covering decades of murders. The FBI released these drawings publicly, alongside the confession videos, asking anyone who recognized a face to come forward. At least one portrait solved a cold case in Akron, Ohio. Other drawings were matched to victims in Arkansas, Georgia, Florida, and multiple additional states. In October 2019, the FBI officially declared Samuel Little the most prolific serial killer in United States history. At that point, investigators had confirmed 50 of his 93 confessed murders through DNA evidence and corroborating witness accounts. More matches were still being processed. In November 2020, weeks before his death, Little confessed to 2 murders in Florida, one of which another man had already been wrongfully convicted of committing. Samuel Little died on December 30th, 2020, at a hospital in California. He was 80 years old. The cause of death was never made public, though he had diabetes, heart problems, and multiple other health conditions. He died serving 3 consecutive life sentences, having been convicted of 8 murders in total across multiple states. His confirmed victim count stood at 60 at the time of his death, with the FBI continuing to work cases afterward. In December 2021, investigators released profiles of 31 additional unidentified victims, many accompanied by Little's portraits, still asking the public for help putting names to faces. Most of the women Little killed have never been publicly identified. Some of their bodies were never found. Some were found and buried as Jane Doe. The families of some of his victims spent decades not knowing what had happened to their mothers, sisters, and daughters, or not even knowing they were gone, because these women had drifted so far from anyone who might look for them. Samuel Little chose them specifically because he believed their lives would leave no trail. He was right for 35 years. The FBI's VICAP crime analyst, Christy Palazzolo, said it plainly. For many years, Samuel Little believed he would not be caught because he thought no one was accounting for his victims. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next killer on this list also confessed everything on camera, but unlike Samuel Little, Gary Ridgway was sitting in a deal negotiation, trying to trade the truth about 48 murders for the one thing he wanted more than anything: to stay alive. Case 3. Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. On the afternoon of November 30th, 2001, detectives from the King County Sheriff's Office drove to the Kenworth truck plant in Renton, Washington, and waited for the end of the shift. When Gary Leon Ridgway walked out of the building, they arrested him. He was 52 years old. He had worked at that plant for nearly 30 years, painting trucks. He went home to his wife each night. He attended church. He had been on their list of suspects since 1982. They finally had his DNA. Gary Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah, the second of 3 sons. His family moved to the Seattle area when he was a child, settling in the neighborhood around SeaTac, a working-class community built up around what would become Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. His father, Thomas, drove a bus. His mother, Mary, worked as a sales clerk and ran the household with an iron hand. Multiple people who knew the family described her as domineering and physically harsh. She punished the boys with a belt or stick for minor offences. Ridgway later told defence psychologists that as a teenager, he had developed deeply conflicting feelings toward his mother, alternating between sexual attraction and violent rage. He wet the bed until he was 13, and each time it happened, his mother would stand him in the shower and wash him herself as punishment, humiliating him repeatedly in front of others. He struggled in school. His measured IQ was in the low 80s, and he was held back 2 grades. His older brother Gregory was considered the accomplished one, ran for student office, went on to study physics. Gary got his girlfriend pregnant while they were both still in high school and married her after graduation in 1970. The marriage lasted 2 years. He served in the US Navy from 1970 to 1971, was deployed to Vietnam, and frequented sex workers in the Philippines during that time, contracting gonorrhea. He came back, remarried, had a son with his second wife Marcia, and divorced again by 1981. He had already been showing warning signs for years. At 16, he lured a 6-year-old boy into a wooded area and stabbed him through the ribs. The boy survived. Ridgway walked away laughing, saying he always wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. There was no criminal record attached to that incident. He had also tortured animals, set fires, and carried sexual fantasies about violence toward women that he never discussed with anyone. In 1980, he was arrested after choking a sex worker who reported it to police. No charges were filed because Ridgway claimed she had bit him first. In 1982, he was arrested for solicitation. He was questioned by police after a witness saw one of the victims, 18-year-old Marie Malvar, get into his truck before she disappeared. He denied knowing her. During that 1983 questioning, Malvar had actually scratched his arms while fighting for her life. Ridgway later confessed that he stood with his back against a fence during the police interview, so detectives could not see his arms. Afterward, he burned the scratches with battery acid to destroy the evidence. Investigators had no grounds to hold him and let him go. In 1984, he passed a polygraph test. The case went cold. By that point, he had already killed dozens of women. His first confirmed victim was 16-year-old Wendy Lee Cofield, a runaway from Puyallup, Washington. On July 15, 1982, 2 teenage boys discovered her body floating in the Green River between Kent and Tukwila. A pair of blue jeans was knotted around her neck. Embedded in those jeans were microscopic spheres of a specific spray paint, the kind used at the Kenworth plant where Ridgway worked. Nobody tested that paint for 20 years. Within a month, 4 more bodies were found in and along the same stretch of river. Deborah Lynn Bonner, 23, Marcia Faye Chapman, 31, Opal Charmaine Mills, 16, and Cynthia Jean Hines, 17. All strangled, all found near the water. The King County Sheriff's Office formed the Green River Task Force, the largest in the region since the Ted Bundy investigation, and the name Green River Killer entered the public vocabulary. Ridgway's method was consistent. He drove Pacific Highway South, a stretch of road south of Seattle, known for street prostitution and runaways, in his truck. He showed potential victims a photograph of his son to make himself appear safe and harmless. He would make conversation, offer money for sex, and then take women to secluded areas, sometimes his own home, sometimes the woods. He would strangle them with his hands, or, later, with a ligature, because he became worried that defensive wounds on his arms would expose him. He trimmed his victims' fingernails after killing them to eliminate any DNA under them. He placed bodies in clusters in wooded areas so he could remember where they were. He deliberately dumped 2 victims near Portland, Oregon, to confuse investigators into thinking the killer was operating in multiple jurisdictions. He left items at dump sites, gum, cigarettes, that had been used by other people, planting false forensic trails. And then he went home, cooked dinner, went to work the next morning. In 1985, he began dating Judith Mawson, who became his 3rd wife in 1988. She described him in a 2010 television interview as making her feel like a newlywed even after 17 years of marriage. She said she had never heard of the Green River Killer because she did not watch the news. When she moved into his house while they were dating, she noticed there was no carpet. Detectives later told her he had probably wrapped a body in it. Ridgway himself later confessed that he had considered killing Mawson, but decided against it because it would have increased his chances of being caught. Of his 49 known victims, only 3 were killed after he married her. He told investigators that when he was with Mawson, his urge to kill decreased. He said he truly loved her. The killing continued through the 1980s and into the 1990s. He would take periodic breaks, then go back out. His final confirmed murder was in 1998. By then, the task force had been disbanded and rebuilt multiple times. Investigators had interviewed thousands of suspects. They had consulted with convicted serial killer Ted Bundy, who was on death row in Florida in 1984, and offered his read on the psychology of the Green River Killer. Bundy correctly told investigators the killer was likely returning to dump sites to have sex with the bodies. It was accurate. Ridgway later confirmed it in his confessions, telling investigators he returned to victims to have sex with their corpses because doing so reduced his urge to find a new victim to rape and kill. The break came in 2001. Advances in DNA technology, specifically in PCR and STR analysis, allowed scientists to re-examine biological evidence collected from victims years earlier. In March 2001, the King County Crime Lab began applying these new methods to Green River evidence. A piece of gauze Ridgway had chewed on during a search warrant execution in 1987 had been kept in storage. DNA from that gauze was compared against semen recovered from victims found in the Green River in 1982 and from a body found at a dump site in 1983. The match was definitive. On November 30th, 2001, Gary Ridgway was arrested at his workplace. He was charged initially with 4 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. 3 more victims were added to the indictment in April 2003, after forensic scientists identified the same Kenworth spray paint found in Ridgway's workplace on clothing wrapped around or near 7 additional victims' bodies. Ridgway pleaded not guilty. His defense team argued he had dated but not killed the women whose DNA linked him to crime scenes. But prosecutors were simultaneously building an overwhelming case, and Ridgway's lawyers began negotiating a deal. The terms were straightforward. Ridgway would plead guilty to every murder he had committed in King County, provide complete and truthful information about all of them, help investigators locate undiscovered bodies, and answer all questions during any subsequent interview. In exchange, the prosecution would not seek the death penalty. For the families of victims who had spent years not knowing what happened to their daughters and sisters, this was the only way they were ever going to get answers. On June 13, 2003, Ridgway formally agreed to the deal. Over the following 5 months, he sat in a series of recorded interviews with prosecutors and detectives. He described 48 murders in detail, where he picked up each woman, where he took her, how he killed her, where he left the body. On November 5, 2003, he stood in King County Superior Court and pleaded guilty to 48 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. In his courtroom statement, he said he had killed so many women that he lost count. He said he wanted to kill as many prostitutes as he possibly could. He called it his career. Beginning on February 9, 2004, King County prosecutors began publicly releasing the videotaped records of his confession sessions. In one tape, he told investigators he was responsible for 65 deaths. In another, recorded on December 31, 2003, he told investigators he had killed 71 women. In those same post-sentencing sessions, he confessed for the first time that he had returned to victims' bodies to have sex with them, a detail he had withheld until after his sentencing was complete and he had no more leverage to lose. When investigators showed him crime scene photographs, he would identify which body was his and which was not. When they presented him with an unsolved murder to see if he would take responsibility for it, he told them he would not claim a murder that was not his because he was proud of what he had done and was not going to accept credit from someone else. On December 18, 2003, King County Superior Court Judge Richard Jones sentenced Ridgway to 48 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Several victims' family members addressed him in court. Some had waited over 20 years to learn what happened to their daughters. Robert Rule, whose daughter Linda had been killed in 1982 when she was 16 years old, spoke to Ridgway directly and said he forgave him, not for Ridgway's sake, but so that Rule himself could move forward. Ridgway showed no visible reaction. In February 2011, Ridgway pleaded guilty to a 49th murder, that of 20-year-old Rebecca Marrero, whose remains had been found by hikers in December 2010 in Auburn, Washington. He received a 49th consecutive life sentence. In September 2024, he was briefly transferred from Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla back to King County Jail after telling investigators he could help them locate additional remains. Court documents unsealed in March 2025 confirmed the transfer had happened, though authorities have not disclosed whether any additional remains were found. Ridgway is currently 76 years old and remains incarcerated at Washington State Penitentiary, where he will die. The Green River Task Force estimate is that Ridgway likely killed somewhere between 71 and 80 women, possibly more. Many victims have never been identified. 3 women confirmed to be missing and believed to be his victims remain unaccounted for. Their cases remain open. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Aileen Wuornos also confessed everything on camera, but unlike Gary Ridgway, who sat in a negotiated room trading confessions for his life, Wuornos confessed because she was trying to protect the woman she loved, while that same woman was sitting with police, helping them record every word. Case 4. Aileen Wuornos, the highway killer. Aileen Carol Pittman was born on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan. Her mother Diane was 16 years old and had married Eileen's father, Leo Pittman, when she was just 14. Leo was gone before Aileen was born. He was later sentenced to life in prison in 1967 for a serious offence and died by suicide in his cell in 1969. Aileen never met him. When she was almost 4 years old, her mother abandoned her and her older brother Keith, leaving them with their maternal grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos. The grandparents legally adopted both children on March 18, 1960. For years, Aileen was not told that the people raising her were actually her grandparents. She believed they were her parents. She found out around the age of 12. What happened inside that house shaped everything that followed. Aileen later said her grandfather Lori was a violent alcoholic who subjected her to ongoing harm and a deeply unstable environment throughout her childhood. He would mistreat her beforehand, placing her in distressing situations. Her grandmother Britta was also an alcoholic. By a young age, Aileen was engaging in exchanges with others for cigarettes, food and substances, which earned her a humiliating nickname from her peers. In 1970, during that period of her life, a friend of her grandfather subjected her to a serious and harmful incident. Later on, she became pregnant. Lori sent her to a home for unwed mothers in Detroit, where she gave birth to a son on March 23, 1971. The baby was immediately placed for adoption. Lori then threw her out of the house. Shortly afterward, Britta died. Aileen was 15 years old, living in the woods on the outskirts of Troy, Michigan, surviving through petty theft and relying on others to get by. There was nobody to report her missing. There was nobody to come looking. Her brother Keith died of esophageal cancer in 1976. He had taken out a $10,000 life insurance policy and left it to her. Aileen spent it on a car, which she wrecked, and on her mounting legal fines. That same year, she hitchhiked to Florida, where she briefly married a 69-year-old retired yacht club president named Louis Gratz Fell. The marriage lasted about 6 weeks. Fell filed a restraining order after she beat him with his own cane. Over the following decade in Florida, she was arrested repeatedly for armed robbery of a convenience store, passing forged checks, auto theft, driving under the influence, illegal possession of firearms, and assault. In 1982, she served time for armed robbery. She attempted suicide at least once. She slept under bridges, in the woods, in abandoned buildings. By the mid-1980s, she was working the Florida highways as a sex worker, standing on the roadside or hitchhiking to find clients among the truck drivers and traveling men who passed through the state. In June 1986, a 30-year-old Wuornos walked into a Daytona Beach gay bar called Zodiac and met a 24-year-old motel maid named Tyra Moore. The two women began a relationship that same night, and within weeks were living together. For the next 4 years, Wuornos supported them both through sex work while Moore cleaned rooms, and they moved from one cheap motel to the next across central Florida. Wuornos later described Moore as the only reason she carried a gun. She said she wanted to make sure she got home alive to spend another day with her. She said she loved Moore more than anything she had ever had. What Wuornos did not tell Moore, at least not in full, was what was beginning to happen on the roadside. On November 30th, 1989, Richard Charles Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics shop owner from Clearwater, picked Wuornos up along Interstate 75 in Florida. His car was found abandoned 2 days later by a Volusia County deputy. On December 13th, his body was found in a wooded area several miles away. He had been shot multiple times with a .22 caliber pistol, and 2 bullets to the left lung were determined to be the cause of death. Wuornos later claimed Mallory had beaten, raped and sodomized her before she shot him. What was not presented at her trial but confirmed afterward through prison records was that Mallory had previously been convicted of attempted rape in Maryland and had served years at a maximum security facility for sexual offenders. The judge refused to allow those records as evidence at her trial. The killings continued through 1990. David Spears, 47, a construction worker from Winter Garden, was found shot 6 times along a highway in Citrus County on June 1, 1990. Charles Carskadden, 40, a part-time rodeo worker, was found shot 9 times and wrapped in an electric blanket in Pasco County on June 6. Peter Seams, 65, a retired merchant seaman, left Jupiter, Florida, for Arkansas in June 1990 and was never seen again. His car was found abandoned on July 4th in Orange Springs, Florida. Witnesses had seen 2 women near the car before it was left there. Seams's body was never found, and because there was no body, Wuornos was never formally charged in his death. Troy Burrus, 50, a sausage salesman from Ocala, was found shot twice in Marion County on August 4th. Charles Richard Humphreys, 56, a retired Air Force major and former police chief who had worked as a state child abuse investigator, was found shot 7 times in the head and torso in Marion County on September 12th. Walter Gino Antonio, 62, a security guard, was found shot 4 times in the back and head in a remote part of Dixie County on November 19, 1990. He had been dead less than 24 hours when his body was found. All 7 men were middle-aged. All were found near Florida highways. All had been shot with the same type of weapon. All had been robbed. Police began connecting the cases in late 1990. They had released composite sketches of 2 women seen abandoning Peter Seams's wrecked car in July, and those sketches drew responses. Meanwhile, investigators discovered that items belonging to Richard Mallory had been pawned at a shop in Daytona Beach. The pawn shop receipt carried a fingerprint. Police ran it against their databases and matched it to one of the aliases Wuornos had used over the years. More stolen property from other victims turned up at pawn shops, traced through the same trail of thumbprints and aliases. By early January 1991, police knew who they were looking for. On January 9, 1991, undercover officers arrested Aileen Wuornos at a biker bar called The Last Resort in Port Orange, Volusia County, Florida. The stated reason for the arrest was an outstanding warrant under one of her aliases, Laurie Grody. The following day, police located Tyria Moore at a relative's home in Pittston, Pennsylvania. Moore denied any involvement in the murders. She agreed to help police get a confession from Wuornos in exchange for full immunity from prosecution. Investigators flew Moore back to Florida, set her up in a Daytona Beach motel, supplied her with food and beer, and recorded 10 phone calls between Moore and Wuornos over 4 days while Wuornos sat in jail. During those calls, Moore wept and told Wuornos she was afraid police were going to arrest her for the murders. She told Wuornos she was thinking about killing herself. Wuornos, sitting in a jail cell, listening to the woman she loved fall apart, said the words that would seal her fate. She told Moore she was not going to let her go to jail. She told her she was innocent and that she was not going to let her get in trouble for something she had not done. She said, "If I have to confess everything just to keep you from getting in trouble, I will." What Wuornos did not know, and what only became fully clear years later, was that police officers were in the motel room with Moore, coaching her on what to say. Moore was not in danger. She had already been given immunity. The entire conversation was a setup designed by investigators to extract a confession, and it worked. On January 16, 1991, 7 days after her arrest, Wuornos confessed to killing 7 men. She told police she had done it in self-defense after each man had either raped her or attempted to rape her. The confession was recorded on video. In it, she appeared calm, direct, and cooperative. At one point, she told her public defender to stop interrupting. She gave directions to where she had thrown her gun, so investigators could send a dive team to recover it. The videotaped confession was played at her trial. On January 14, 1992, Wuornos went on trial for the murder of Richard Mallory in DeLand, Florida. It was the only case that went to a full jury trial. The prosecution used Florida's Williams Rule to bring in evidence from all 6 other murders, allowing jurors to see the full pattern of killings. Tira Moore testified calmly for the prosecution, telling the jury about her years with Wuornos and saying that Wuornos had never told her any of the men had assaulted her. On January 27, 1992, the jury convicted Wuornos of first-degree murder. When the verdict was read, she stood up and shouted at the courtroom. On January 31, 1992, she was sentenced to death. She later pleaded no contest to the murders of David Spears, Troy Burrus, and Charles Humphreys in March 1992, and pleaded guilty to killing Charles Carskadden in June 1992 and Walter Antonio in February 1993. She was never charged in Peter Siems's death. In total, she received 6 death sentences. A 44-year-old born-again Christian woman named Aileen, who had seen Wuornos's photograph in a newspaper, legally adopted Wuornos in November 1991. She had never met Wuornos before writing to her. Wuornos spent more than 10 years on Florida's death row. In a 1997 prison interview filmed by artist Jasmine Hurst, which was only publicly released in the Netflix documentary Aileen, Queen of the Serial Killers, in 2025, Wuornos said on camera, "The real Aileen Wuornos isn't a serial killer. I was so lost, I turned into one." In later years on death row, she recanted her self-defense claims for some of the killings, though she maintained until her execution that Mallory had genuinely raped her. She told her childhood friend Dawn Botkins, the night before she died, that she was definitely a serial killer, and that it had been all the years of abuse, and then she started drinking, and then there was Ty. On October 9, 2002, at 9:30 in the morning, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison in Stark, Florida. She was 46 years old. She was pronounced dead at 9:47 a.m. She declined her final meal. She was the 3rd woman ever executed in the state of Florida. Her ashes were scattered beneath a tree in Michigan by Dawn Botkins at Wuornos's request, with Natalie Merchant's song Carnival playing. She had listened to that album for hours on death row. Tira Moore was never charged with any crime. She did not attend the trial, the sentencing, or the execution. She retreated from public life immediately after testifying. The 10 phone calls she made from that motel room in Daytona Beach were the backbone of the prosecution's entire case, and they happened because Wuornos believed the woman she loved was in danger. She was wrong. Moore had already been granted immunity before the first call was even made. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Richard Cottingham also confessed on camera, but unlike Wuornos, who confessed in a single week out of love for someone who had already betrayed her, Cottingham spent 20 years slowly drip-feeding confessions to a detective, one cold case at a time, treating every admission like a bargaining chip he could take back at any moment. Case 5. Richard Cottingham, the Torso Killer. On the morning of December 2, 1979, firefighters from the New York City Fire Department were called to the Travel Inn Motor Hotel on West 42nd Street in Manhattan after smoke was spotted coming from room 417. A Do Not Disturb sign was on the door. The room had been rented 3 days earlier under the name Carl Wilson of Merlin, New Jersey, a town that does not exist. When firefighters entered the burning room, they found 2 naked women on separate beds. One firefighter picked up a body to attempt resuscitation and immediately stopped. There was no head. Both women had been beheaded. Both had their hands cut off. Their killer had set fire to the mattresses beneath them before walking out of the hotel with the severed body parts in a bag. The heads and hands were never found. Richard Francis Cottingham was born on November 25, 1946, in the Mott Haven neighborhood of the Bronx, New York City, the first of 4 children. His family moved to Dumont, New Jersey in 1948, and then to Rivervale in 1956, where he spent his teenage years in what every person who knew him described as a completely normal, comfortable Catholic household. His father was a vice president at Metropolitan Life Insurance. His mother was a homemaker. 3 younger sisters who adored him, Catholic schools, no history of abuse, no broken home, no documented trauma. Forensic historian Peter Vronsky, who has spent more than 50 hours interviewing Cottingham since 2017, has said that Cottingham's childhood was, by all accounts, absolutely idyllic. There was nothing obvious pointing toward what was coming. He graduated from Pascack Valley High School in 1964 and walked straight into a job in the mailroom at Metropolitan Life in Manhattan, where his father worked. He taught himself computer skills and worked his way up to become a computer operator. In 1966, he took a position at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Greater New York, where he continued doing the same work and where he would remain employed until his arrest 14 years later. In October 1970, he married a woman named Janet Cunningham at a church in Queens Village. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. On paper, he was doing everything exactly right. He commuted to Manhattan, came home to suburban New Jersey, went to work, raised a family. His co-workers saw nothing unusual. His neighbours saw a family man. What none of them knew was that by the time Cottingham walked into his first day at Blue Cross Blue Shield in 1966, he had already killed at least once. His first confirmed victim was 29-year-old Nancy Schiava Vogel, a married mother of 2 from the Bergen County area of New Jersey. On October 30th, 1967, she left her home in the evening to play bingo with friends at a local church. Her bound, naked body was found 3 days later in the back seat of her own car, parked on a residential street in Ridgefield Park. She had been strangled. Police had no suspect and no leads. The case went cold for 43 years. Cottingham killed throughout the late 1960s and 1970s while living his double life as a husband, father, and office worker. He targeted women he could isolate: sex workers, teenage girls hitchhiking, women alone at shopping malls or bus stops. He drugged them with barbiturates or prescription sedatives, restrained them with handcuffs, and took them to motel rooms where he tortured them for hours, or sometimes days, before killing them by strangulation. He removed items from victims, jewellery, keepsakes, personal belongings, and stored them in a secret locked room in the basement of his home. His wife Janet later filed for divorce in April 1978, citing mental cruelty and abandonment, having no idea why her husband was never home at night. She withdrew the petition after his arrest in 1980, then completed the divorce after his first conviction in 1981. On December 2, 1979, Cottingham committed what became his most infamous crime. He lured 2 women to room 417 of the Travel Inn Motor Hotel near Times Square. One was 22-year-old Didi Gudazi, an Iranian immigrant who had come to New York as a teenager and was working as a sex worker. The second victim, who was later estimated to be around 16 years old, has never been identified and remains a Jane Doe to this day. Cottingham held both women in that room for multiple days, torturing and sexually assaulting them. An autopsy later confirmed both had been alive for days before he killed them. He strangled them both. He then severed their heads and hands, doused the bodies in lighter fluid, set them on fire, packed the severed body parts into a soft bag, and walked out of the hotel. The fire department arrived to find 2 charred, headless, handless torsos. The press named the unknown killer the Torso Killer and the Times Square Ripper. Nobody knew who he was. The next murder known to investigators occurred on May 5, 1980, when 19-year-old Valerie Ann Street was found strangled and bound at a Quality Inn motel in Hasbrouck Heights, New Jersey. A fingerprint was later lifted from a stainless steel handcuff still on her wrists, but that match would not come for weeks. 10 days after Street's body was found, on May 15, 1980, 25-year-old Mary Ann Jean Rayner was found in a hotel room at the Seville Hotel in Manhattan. She had been strangled, her throat had been cut, both of her breasts had been removed and placed on the headboard. Her body had been set on fire. Then, on May 22, 1980, Cottingham picked up 18-year-old Leslie Ann Odell on the streets of Manhattan and took her to the same Quality Inn in Hasbrouck Heights, where he had left Valerie Street's body just weeks before. He told Odell he was going to help her get off the streets. Once inside the motel room, he restrained her, told her she was a whore who had to be punished, and began torturing her. Odell later recalled him telling her that the other girls had taken it, and she had to take it too. She found a gun in the room, pointed it at him, and realised it was fake. She screamed. A maid heard muffled sounds through the wall and called police. Officers arrived and arrested Cottingham on the spot. In the room and in his possession, police found handcuffs, knives, gags, and prescription drugs. When they searched his home in Lodi, New Jersey, they found his locked basement room, a collection of personal items, jewellery, and trinkets belonging to women he had killed. In a series of trials between 1981 and 1984, Cottingham was convicted of 5 murders. Mary Ann Carr, killed in 1977 and found in the Quality Inn parking lot; Valerie Ann Street; Dide Gudazi, and the unidentified teenager from Times Square; and Mary Ann Jean Rayner. He maintained throughout every trial that he had been framed. He received a sentence of life plus 117 years in New Jersey, followed by a consecutive 75 years to life in New York for the Manhattan convictions, a total minimum of 192 years plus life to be served back to back. He was sent to New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. He continued insisting he was innocent. He kept insisting until 2009, when he admitted on the record for the first time that he had committed the 5 murders for which he had been convicted. By then, a Bergen County detective named Robert Anzalotti had already been visiting him for 6 years. Anzalotti was assigned in 2000 to review unsolved cold cases from the 1960s and 1970s that he believed might be connected to Cottingham. He began visiting Cottingham in prison in 2003. The relationship took years to develop and years more to produce anything usable. Cottingham treated every potential confession like a negotiation, demanding press silence, demanding promises, demanding that nothing go public. Anzalotti promised to tell victims' families but not hold press conferences. It took 6 years of these visits before Cottingham finally gave the first formal confession. In 2010, he pleaded guilty to the 1967 murder of Nancy Vogel, the strangled mother of 2 who had left home to play bingo 43 years earlier. Her son Bill and her daughter, who were small children when they lost their mother, finally learned who had killed her. Nancy's own mother had died years earlier without ever knowing. The confessions continued, each one extracted slowly, each one on Cottingham's terms. In 2014, during a videotaped interview with Anzalotti and his partner Detective Jimmy McMorrow at the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office, Cottingham confessed to the murders of 3 teenage girls in the late 1960s. Jacqueline Harp, 13, killed in 1968, Irene Blaze, 15, killed in 1969, and Denise Velasca, 16, also killed in 1969. These 3 cases were closed through non-prosecution agreements, meaning the families were informed and the cases were officially resolved, but Cottingham faced no additional charges. The BCPO kept these confessions out of the media for 5 years to keep Cottingham talking. In April 2021, Cottingham confessed to one of the most notorious cold cases in New Jersey history, the 1974 abduction, rape, and murder of 16-year-old Lorraine Kelly and 17-year-old Mary Ann Pryor. The 2 teenage friends had left North Bergen on August 9, 1974, planning to hitchhike to the Garden State Plaza Mall in Paramus to shop for bathing suits. They were never seen alive again. Their bodies were found 5 days later in a wooded area in Montvale, New Jersey. They were naked, bound together at the wrists and ankles, face down beside each other. Both had been beaten, raped, and drowned in a motel bathtub. Cottingham later told investigators he had held them for more than 30 hours before killing them. He told Anzalotti that the Kelly Pryor case bothered him more than most because of the girls' ages. He pleaded guilty on April 20, 2021, and received 2 additional life sentences. Anzalotti retired from law enforcement weeks later. On December 5, 2022, appearing by video link from prison in a Nassau County, New York courtroom, while wearing a green prison smock, Cottingham admitted to the 1968 rape and murder of 23-year-old dance teacher Diane Cusick, who had been found dead in her car outside a shopping mall. He also admitted that day to killing 4 other women on Long Island between 1972 and 1973. He received an additional 25 years to life for Cusick's murder. The case was solved through DNA evidence and was described by authorities as among the oldest cases ever prosecuted using direct DNA evidence. Jennifer Weiss, the daughter of D-Day Godazi, gave up for adoption 16 months before Cottingham killed her in that Times Square hotel room, has visited Cottingham in prison more than 30 times. She has described doing it for her mother's sake and for every other woman whose family has been waiting. She told reporters that she desperately wanted to find her mother's skull. Cottingham has told investigators he knows where he buried the bag containing D-Day's severed head and hands, but that information has not been publicly confirmed. As of 2025, Richard Cottingham, now 78 years old, remains incarcerated at Southwood State Prison in Bridgeton, New Jersey. He is confirmed to have murdered 20 women between 1967 and 1980. He has claimed he killed between 85 and 100. Anzalotti once summarised Cottingham's relationship to confession with a single observation. For Cottingham, it was literally just a game. A game of whether you could get it out of him. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Joel Rifkin also confessed everything on camera, but unlike Cottingham, who spent 20 years rationing his admissions one cold case at a time, Rifkin did it all in a single 6-hour police interrogation. The night officers pulled over his truck on a Long Island highway because it had no license plate. Case 6. Joel Rifkin, New York's most prolific serial killer. Joel David Rifkin was born on January 20, 1959, in New York City, to two unmarried college students who placed him for adoption almost immediately. 3 weeks later, a couple named Bernard and Jean Rifkin adopted him and brought him to their home on Long Island. Bernard was a structural engineer. The family later adopted a second child, a daughter named Jan. In 1965, they moved to East Meadow, a quiet suburb in Nassau County, where the Rifkins lived a comfortable, unremarkable middle-class life. From the outside, Joel had everything he needed. What he could not find, from the first day of school onward, was a single place where he fit in. He walked with a sloping posture and a slow, heavy gait, which his classmates immediately noticed and mocked. They nicknamed him the Turtle. Despite having an IQ of 128, he struggled academically because of undiagnosed dyslexia, which frustrated his father, a mathematician who could not understand why his son could not keep up. Teammates on the track team he joined in high school dunked his head in a toilet, stuffed a dead chicken in his mouth, and filled his gym bag with eggs and shaving cream. When he joined the yearbook club hoping for a quieter social outlet, his camera was stolen and he was not invited to the wrap party at the end of the year. His mother later told a writer that the yearbook rejection was the only time she ever saw Joel visibly shaken to his core. He graduated from East Meadow High School in 1977 and tried several colleges over the next several years: Nassau Community College, the State University of New York at Brockport, and SUNY Farmingdale, moving between them, earning poor grades, dropping out of each one. At Brockport, he had his only real relationship with a woman, which she later described as going nowhere, though she remembered him as sweet and always depressed. Back home in East Meadow by the mid-1980s, he worked a series of short-lived jobs. His manager at a music store said he could not count to 10. He spent most of whatever money he had on sex workers in Manhattan, was regularly robbed by them and their pimps, and kept cycling back to do it again. His obsession with prostitutes had started in his early teens, fueled partly by watching Alfred Hitchcock's 1972 film Frenzy, which depicts the strangulation of women. He began collecting press clippings and books about the murders of sex workers. On February 20, 1987, his father Bernard died by suicide, overdosing on medication after a prolonged and painful battle with prostate cancer. Joel delivered the eulogy and moved his mother to tears. He kept living at home with his mother and sister. 2 years later, in March 1989, while his mother was away on a business trip, the fantasies that had been building for nearly 2 decades took over. He drove to the East Village in Manhattan and picked up a young woman he knew only as Susie. He later learned through DNA testing in 2013 that her real name was Heidi Bouch and that she was 25 years old. He brought her back to the family house in East Meadow, had sex with her, and then picked up a souvenir howitzer artillery shell he had bought at a flea market and beat her with it, striking her head more than 20 times until his arms gave out. She was still alive. She bit his finger deeply when he tried to move her, and he strangled her to death. He carried her body to the basement, dismembered it with a knife, removed her teeth with pliers, and cut off her fingertips to prevent identification, put her head in an old paint can, and disposed of the different parts in separate locations: arms and torso into the East River, legs in the woods near Hopewell, New Jersey, and the paint can at the 7th hole of the Hopewell Valley Golf Club. A golfer found the paint can containing the severed head days later. The head went unidentified for 24 years. The coroner who examined the remains concluded the woman had died of a drug overdose. Rifkin did not kill again for over a year. Then in 1990, he killed Julie Blackbird, weighting her dismembered body parts in concrete-filled buckets and sinking them in the East River and a canal in Brooklyn. After that, the pace accelerated. In 1991, he killed Barbara Jacobs, 31, wrapping her body in plastic, placing it in a cardboard box, and dropping it in the Hudson River. Firefighters on a training exercise found her within hours. The coroner again ruled it a drug overdose. He killed Mary Ellen DeLuca, 22, in September 1991, leaving her body in a steamer trunk at a highway rest stop near West Point. He killed Yun Lee, 31, throwing her into the East River. He killed Lorraine Orvieto, 28, and placed her body in a 55-gallon oil drum in Coney Island Creek. He killed Mary Ann Holloman and put her in an oil drum as well. He killed a woman he never identified, who remains a Jane Doe. He killed Violet O'Neill, Lauren Marquez, Mary Catherine Williams, Anna Lopez, Iris Sanchez, and Jenny Soto. He killed Leah Evans. None of these women had been reported as serial killer victims because nobody knew a serial killer was operating. Many of them had never been reported missing at all. Their families, if they had contact with them, assumed they had simply moved on or disappeared into the life they were living. When bodies turned up, they were ruled overdoses or unknown causes. Rifkin knew this and counted on it. He later told an interviewer that he described his victims as drug-addicted women because they were easy to pick up and easy to dispose of, and then named the lie he had told himself, that they were disease-carrying vermin who had no families. He said later that this was how he justified it to himself, and that the real truth was they were people with parents and children who loved them, and he had simply lied to himself because it was easier. By June 1993, Rifkin had killed 16 women over 4 years, and no law enforcement agency in New York was aware he existed. On June 24, 1993, he picked up 22-year-old Tiffany Bresciani on Allen Street in Manhattan. Bresciani was originally from Metairie, Louisiana, and had moved to New York at 17 with the goal of becoming a singer or actress. A drug addiction had pulled her into sex work. Her boyfriend, punk musician Dave Rubinstein, watched her get into Rifkin's truck and waited for her to come back. She had told him she would be back in 20 minutes. When she did not return, Rubinstein called police and gave them a description of the truck. Rifkin drove Bresciani to the New York Post's parking lot in Manhattan, where he strangled her in the early morning hours of June 24th. He drove the body back to his family home in East Meadow, wrapped it in a tarp, placed it in a wheelbarrow in the garage, and left it there for 3 days in the June heat, while he obtained rope and tarpaulin and figured out where to dump her. On June 28, 1993, at 3:15 in the morning, New York State Troopers Sean Ruan and Deborah Spargaran were patrolling the Southern State Parkway when they spotted a 1984 tan Mazda B 2000 pickup truck with no rear license plate. They activated their lights. The driver did not stop. He accelerated, took the Wantar Avenue exit at approximately 65 miles per hour, and led 5 additional patrol cars on a chase through Nassau County streets at speeds reaching 90 miles per hour for 20 to 25 minutes. The chase ended when Rifkin attempted a left turn onto Old Country Road in Mineola, lost control and crashed into a utility pole, stopping 70 to 75 feet from the intersection. He was removed from the vehicle without resistance. As troopers began an inventory search to impound the truck, they were immediately hit by a powerful, unmistakable smell coming from beneath the tarp in the truck's bed. Under it was the decomposing body of Tiffany Bresciani. Rifkin was taken to the police station. Homicide detectives began the interrogation later that night. According to the New York State Police official account, Rifkin admitted to the murder of Bresciani, and then, when asked if there were others, began talking. He did not stop. Over the course of the 6-hour interrogation, he confessed to killing 17 women in total. He described each murder. He wrote down the names he could remember. He drew maps showing investigators where he had disposed of bodies and body parts across New York and New Jersey. Detectives who sat across from him that night later described him as displaying almost no emotion throughout. He was calm. He was cooperative. One law enforcement source told the Daily News that he never gave them a motive. He just said he had been picking up prostitutes since he got his driver's license at 16, and that was the way it had always been. When police searched the family home in East Meadow, Rifkin's mother Jean and his sister Jan told investigators they had no idea what had been happening. The search of Joel's room confirmed why. He had kept meticulous trophies. Investigators found driver's licenses, credit cards, bras, underwear, and personal belongings belonging to his victims, all stored in his bedroom. He had kept a piece of each woman. 15 of the 17 victims were eventually identified through the investigation. 2 remain unidentified to this day. On May 9, 1994, a jury convicted Rifkin of the second-degree murder of Tiffany Bresciani after deliberating for less than a day. At sentencing in June 1994, he stood in court and told the families present that they all thought he was nothing but a monster and that they were right. He received 25 years to life for Bresciani's murder, plus additional time for reckless endangerment during the chase. He subsequently pleaded guilty to 8 additional murders across multiple sentencing hearings. By January 1996, he had accumulated 9 convictions and a total sentence of 203 years in prison, making him ineligible for parole until the year 2197. The sister of victim Iris Sanchez, who attended sentencing, told the court that Iris was not a throwaway and that Rifkin would now rot in hell. Rifkin stood at the podium and did not respond. He is currently incarcerated at Clinton Correctional Facility in Clinton County, New York. He told an interviewer in 2011 that if he had not been caught, there probably would have been more victims. He said he had wanted to stop, but doubted he would have. He described where he was, prison, as the best place for him. The 2 victims who have never been identified have no names in any official record. Their families, if they have any, still do not know what happened to them. Also confessed on camera, but his confession came completely differently. Extracted after police cut 5 locks off a metal shipping container on his property and found a woman chained inside. And the first person to describe what he had done was not Kohlhepp himself, but the woman who had survived 2 months of captivity and watched him murder her boyfriend. Case 7. Todd Kohlhepp, the real estate killer. Todd Christopher Kohlhepp was born on March 7, 1971, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. His parents divorced when he was 2 years old. His mother remarried, and Kohlhepp's relationship with his stepfather was strained from the beginning. Psychological reports filed during his later criminal proceedings described him as aggressive and explosive from nursery school onward. He destroyed other children's property, could not function in group settings, showed cruelty toward animals, and at age 9 was already in counselling, where professionals documented that he was preoccupied with sexual content in a way that was deeply unusual for his age. He was admitted to a psychiatric facility in Georgia for several months due to his inability to coexist safely with other children. In 1983, when Kohlhepp was 12, his mother sent him to live with his biological father, William Sampsell, in Tempe, Arizona, a man he had not seen in nearly a decade. The 2 bonded initially over guns and explosives, with his father teaching him how to handle weapons and make bombs. But his father was largely absent, frequently occupied with girlfriends, and Kohlhepp began asking to come back to his mother. She made excuses to keep him in Arizona. He later described those years as a second abandonment. On November 25, 1986, while his father was away, 15-year-old Kohlhepp walked 3 houses down from where he lived and forced 14-year-old Christy Granado to go with him, using a .22 caliber revolver. He brought her back to his home, restrained her, and carried out a serious and harmful incident. Afterward, He walked her home and told her there would be severe consequences for her family if she told anyone. She told someone. Kohlhepp was arrested. In 1987, he pleaded guilty to kidnapping. The sexual assault charge was dropped as part of the deal and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The judge who presided over the case wrote in his ruling that Kohlhepp was very bright and should have been advanced academically, but was behaviourally and emotionally dangerous and likely could not be rehabilitated. The judge also noted on the record that Kohlhepp had been unabatedly aggressive since nursery school and that 25 months of intensive professional intervention had provided no protection for the public. His probation officer wrote that Kohlhepp felt the world owed him something. During his time in the Arizona prison system, after an initial period of violations, Kohlhepp settled down and earned 2 bachelor's degrees, one in computer science from Central Arizona College and one in business administration from the University of South Carolina Upstate, which he completed after his release. He was paroled in August 2001 after serving 14 years and registered as a sex offender in South Carolina, where his mother was living. What came next is the part nobody saw coming, because they were not looking. Kohlhepp rebuilt his life in full view of everyone around him. He obtained a real estate license in 2006, possible because he lied about his felony conviction on the application, and built a firm called TKA Real Estate that eventually employed 12 agents. He was recognized as a top-selling agent in the upstate Carolina region. He drove a BMW. He had a pilot's license. He owned a 95-acre property in Woodruff, Spartanburg County, that he described as his dream home development. Neighbors and colleagues described him as knowledgeable, professional, and slightly odd. Nobody flagged him as dangerous. Nobody ran the background check that would have caught the sex offender registration. The man who a judge said could not be rehabilitated had apparently rehabilitated himself. He had not. On November 6, 2003, just over 2 years after his release from prison, Kohlhepp walked into Superbike Motorsports, a motorcycle dealership in Chesney, South Carolina, and shot 4 people to death. The victims were Scott Ponder, 30, the shop's owner, Brian Lucas, 29, the service manager and Ponder's close friend, Chris Sherbert, 26, a mechanic, and Beverly Guy, 52, who was Scott Ponder's own mother and the shop's bookkeeper. 18 shell casings from a 9mm pistol were found at the scene. Nothing was stolen. An envelope of cash sat untouched in plain sight. The killer had moved fast and left quickly. A friend of Scott Ponder's, named Noel Lee, had called ahead to say he was coming by. He arrived less than 10 minutes after the call. He found Brian Lucas and Scott Ponder lying in blood near the front of the building and entrance, nudged one of them with his foot, thinking it was a prank, and walked inside, where he found Beverly Guy on the floor near the bathroom and Chris Sherbert slumped over a motorcycle he had been preparing. The case remained completely unsolved for 13 years. Investigators tested 27 different confiscated guns against the shell casings. They sent casings to England to see if new forensic technology could pull fingerprints. They pursued dozens of theories: drug connections, love triangles, rival dealers. Scott Ponder's widow was at one point wrongly suspected. Every lead went cold. The case was covered by America's Most Wanted, uploaded to the Unsolved Mysteries website, and mourned by the Chesney community for over a decade. Then, in December 2015, a married couple named Johnny Joe Coxey, 29, and Megan Lee McCraw Coxey, 26, disappeared from Spartanburg. They had been struggling financially, and Kohlhepp had offered them work clearing land on his property. According to Kohlhepp's later confession, they arrived together and Johnny pulled a knife on him, so he shot Johnny immediately. He then held Megan in his metal shipping container on the property for about a week, buying her cigarettes, Dr. Pepper, and pizza, before deciding she was too hard to control and killing her. Their bodies were buried on his land. Their families reported them missing before Christmas. Nobody connected them to a real estate agent with a clean professional record. On August 31st, 2016, a 30-year-old woman named Kayla Brown and her 32-year-old boyfriend Charles David Carver drove to Kohlhepp's property outside Woodruff to help him clear some brush. Brown had done cleaning work for his real estate listings before and had no reason to be afraid of him. When they arrived, Kohlhepp asked them to wait while he went into a garage to get something. He came back out and shot Carver 3 times in the chest without warning. He wrapped Carver's body in a blue tarp, loaded it into the bucket of a tractor, and buried it in a shallow grave on the property. He then led Brown inside, handcuffed her, and chained her by the neck to the wall of the metal shipping container. He told her he was sorry he had to shoot Carver. He later told investigators he did not know whether he was going to kill her or sell her. Brown survived 65 days chained in that container. She was also raped. Kohlhepp brought her food, a television, colouring books, and a Walkman. He explained Stockholm Syndrome to her and told her it would kick in and they would be happy together. He also told her there were other bodies buried on the property. Kayla Brown's cell phone data became the thread that unravelled everything. Investigators tracking her missing persons case determined that her phone signal had last been active in the area of Kohlhepp's Woodruff property. On November 3, 2016, Spartanburg County Sheriff Chuck Wright drove to the property. His deputies heard banging coming from inside the green metal shipping container. They spent 10 minutes sawing through 5 padlocks on the doors. The rescue was captured entirely on police body camera footage. When the doors opened, deputies walked past shelves, cases of bottled water, and plastic bins until they reached the end of the dark container, where Kayla Brown was sitting on a mattress on the floor. She had a chain around her neck attached to the wall. She had a second chain on one ankle. She was fully clothed. As deputies began cutting the chain from around her neck, Brown spoke clearly and immediately. She told them exactly what had happened. Todd Kohlhepp shot Charlie Carver 3 times in the chest, wrapped him in a blue tarp, put him in the bucket of the tractor, locked me down here. I've never seen him again. He says he's dead and buried. He says there are several bodies dead and buried out here. Those were among the first words she said. She also told them Kohlhepp had spread red pepper around the graves to throw off scent-sniffing dogs. Kohlhepp was arrested the same day at his home. Carver's body was found in its shallow grave. Over the following 2 days, the bodies of Johnny and Megan Coxey were also dug up from his property. After authorities agreed to let Kohlhepp speak to his mother, give her a photograph, and transfer money to the college fund of a friend's child, he began confessing on video. The recorded interrogations were conducted over multiple sessions at the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office. In one of them, describing the Superbike massacre in 2003, Kohlhepp told investigators, "I cleared that building in under 30 seconds. I'm sorry, but you guys would have been proud." He described waiting for all 4 employees to be present, shooting Sherbert first because he was crouched beside a motorcycle beneath him, then shooting Ponder's mother Beverly because she was the closest and he had not intended to kill her, but she was there. He described the tactical reload. He bragged about wearing gloves when loading his gun to ensure no fingerprints were on the casings, and about disassembling the weapon afterward and dropping its components in separate trash bins, putting the barrel in a bag of used kitty litter. He described what he was thinking during the murders with the detachment of someone reviewing a task they had completed at work. His tone throughout the interrogation was calm and almost bored. The only emotion detectives noted was occasional laughter. On May 26, 2017, Kohlhepp stood before Judge J. Durham Cole in Spartanburg County Court and pleaded guilty to 7 counts of murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and 1 count of criminal sexual assault. The guilty plea was a deal to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms without any possibility of parole, plus 60 additional years for the kidnapping and sexual assault charges. In the courtroom were the families of his victims. Lorraine Lucas, whose son Brian had been killed at Superbike in 2003, told reporters she had not wanted to go to her grave without knowing who had taken her son. Terry Guy, whose wife Beverly had been killed in the same massacre, said life since her death had been a total hell, and that the worst can happen at the snap of a finger. Melissa Ponder, Scott's widow, said she was not consumed by hatred toward Kohlhepp, but that she was sad. Sad that whatever had formed in him had resulted in all of this. Scott Ponder had a son, Scotty Jr., who was born after his father was murdered and never met him. Scotty was present at sentencing. He told a reporter that he just did not want any more people to die. Following his arrest, Kohlhepp told his mother there were more victims than the ones police had found. When she asked how many, he told her she did not have enough fingers. He has not confirmed additional victims, and no further charges have been brought. He is currently incarcerated in South Carolina, serving 7 consecutive life sentences. __quote_6___. Jeremy Skibicki's confession worked differently still. Instead of being extracted over weeks or coaxed through deals, his came after nearly 20 hours in a police interrogation room, ending in the moment he leaned back in his chair and simply announced that he had killed 4 people. Case 8. Jeremy Skibicki, the Winnipeg serial killer. On the morning of May 16, 2022, a man searching through dumpsters in a back lane in the North Kildonan neighbourhood of Winnipeg for scrap metal and salvageable clothing made a discovery that would open one of Canada's most disturbing serial murder cases. Inside a garbage bin near a small apartment building, he found what appeared to be human remains. Police arrived and spent 2 days searching through the surrounding trash before confirming the partial remains belonged to 24-year-old Rebecca Comtois, a member of the Ochichak-Kohlhepp First Nation, also known as Crane River, located on the western shore of Lake Manitoba. More of her remains were later found at the city-run Brady Road landfill, where a municipal garbage truck had transported them during a routine residential pickup. 2 days after Comtois' remains were identified, police arrested the man who had rented the nearby apartment, 35-year-old Jeremy Skibicki. What they did not know yet was that Rebecca Comtois was not his first victim. She was his 4th. Jeremy Anthony Michael Skibicki was born in Winnipeg and adopted as an infant by a Polish family. His birth mother was originally from Newfoundland and Labrador. Former classmates at Argyle Alternative High School in Winnipeg described him as a towering figure, unusually tall, with grey hair even as a teenager, and a deep voice that unsettled people around him. He was remembered as timid and passive around men, but aggressive toward women. One classmate recalled him throwing her across the room during a gathering at a friend's house. His first brushes with the law were minor, including a forgery charge in 2008, but his behaviour escalated steadily. By his mid-20s, his Facebook page was being used to post misogynistic, anti-Semitic, and white supremacist content. He described himself as a member of far-right organisations promoting the idea that white Europeans needed to preserve their bloodlines from race mixing and immigration. He had a roommate in the months before the murders, Gabriel Delorme, who later told journalists that during the time they lived together, Skibicki's talk about white supremacy became more frequent and his behaviour increasingly strange and sinister. Delorme moved out weeks before Skibicki was arrested. The documented history of violence against women was there for anyone to look at. In 2015, Skibicki was living with a pregnant common-law partner in a downtown Winnipeg apartment. During an altercation that summer, he grabbed her hair, punched her in the face multiple times, and attempted to strangle her. He threatened to kill her if she called police. She applied for a protection order that same year and wrote in the application that Skibicki had admitted fantasizing about raping her and choking her to death, and that he had smothered her so severely her teeth started to bleed. She wrote that she was afraid he would not stop until she was dead. The application for the protection order was dismissed. In June 2015, Skibicki was convicted of the assault, sentenced to 2 months in prison and 2 years of probation. The probation conditions required him to stay away from her. In 2018, Skibicki married a woman who later filed a protection order against him on their first wedding anniversary in 2019. In court documents and testimony, she described sustained abuse that included him holding a pillow over her face, sexually assaulting her while she slept after forcing her to take pills he described as bed meds, and threatening to kill her, torture her, have her trafficked, or put her in a garbage bag. She testified that he explicitly told her he would do 3 life sentences. Both women Skibicki had relationships with before 2022 were Indigenous, and both were of Métis descent. In 2021, charges related to the assault of his wife were stayed. A few months later, Skibicki moved to an apartment in North Kildonan and started visiting Winnipeg homeless shelters. On or around March 15, 2022, police believe Skibicki killed his first victim. For nearly 3 years, she had no official name. She was referred to by investigators only as Buffalo Woman. a name given to her by Indigenous community leaders and elders in a ceremony, following traditional practices that allow an unidentified person to be acknowledged in the spirit realm. Winnipeg police released a photograph of a baby fat brand jacket with a fur hood that Skibicki told investigators he had sold on Facebook Marketplace after killing her. In March 2025, Winnipeg police finally identified her as Ashley Shingoose, a woman from St. Teresa Point Anishinaabe Nation. She was in her 20s when she was killed. Skibicki killed Morgan Beatrice Harris, 39, a member of Long Plain First Nation, on or around May 1, 2022. Harris had been experiencing homelessness for close to a decade, and her daughter Cambria had been raised partly separated from her. Skibicki killed Mercedes Myron, 26, also a member of Long Plain First Nation, on or around May 4th. He killed Rebecca Contois on May 14th or 15th. Contois' partial remains were discovered the following day. The method was consistent across all 4 murders. Skibicki met each woman at homeless shelters in Winnipeg, where he had become a regular visitor in the months before the killings. He brought each one back to his North Kildonan apartment, where he sexually assaulted or confined them before strangling or drowning them in his bathtub. He then disposed of their remains in garbage bins in the back lanes near his building. Prosecutors established at trial that his murders were intentional, planned, and racially motivated. On his computer, investigators found a series of searches conducted in the days surrounding each killing. Questions about when police can take DNA, how long they can keep it, what fingerprints can and cannot be traced, Winnipeg's residential garbage collection schedule, and, on the same day as the first killing in March 2022, a search for the definition of a serial killer. In the week before his arrest, Skibicki sent a Facebook message to his estranged wife around midnight on May 9th, telling her he might not be caught, but could be doing like 3 life sentences. The arrest came on May 17th, 2022. Officers from a Winnipeg police tactical team ordered Skibicki to the ground near a bus stop on Henderson Highway in the northeast of the city. He was taken into custody as a suspect in the killing of Rebecca Contois, whose remains had been found the previous day. He was brought in for questioning by Detective Greg Allen and Detective Sergeant Adam Danilishan. The interrogation lasted approximately 20 hours and was filmed in full. For hours, Skibicki sat in a grey interrogation room on a black plastic chair and deflected. He asked repeatedly for an Orthodox priest. He received a sandwich and pizza pops. He made statements suggesting he was not necessarily guilty of anything, but felt compelled to seek justice. Then, after hours of questioning about Contois, something shifted. He leaned back in his chair, hands loosely clasped in his lap, and told the 2 detectives that he had killed 4 people. Detective Sergeant Danilishan later testified that he froze in his chair when he heard those words. Detective Allen told the court he had no knowledge of any additional killings until that moment. Skibicki told the detectives that the world was sick and that the criminal justice system was a joke, and said he had been so spent emotionally he was driven to do it. He told them he believed what he had done was something God had called him to do. He could not remember the names of all the women. He named 2 of them. He told investigators that Contois' remains were not only in the garbage near his apartment, but that more had gone to the landfill. He told them Ashley Shingoose had been wearing a baby fat jacket when he killed her, and that he had sold that jacket afterward on Facebook. He gave investigators what he said was her name, but police tracked down the woman he named and found her alive, confirming the victim he was describing remained unidentified. He told them he had also brought other women to his apartment, but had not killed them if they sat at his computer to use Facebook, or in one case, if he noticed a woman was wearing a rosary. He said he had let that woman leave. The videotaped confession was admitted as evidence and shown to the courtroom at trial in May 2024. The portion of the tape that showed Skibicki announcing he had killed 4 people was played publicly by Manitoba courts. His lawyers argued that the 20-hour interrogation had created an atmosphere of oppression and that the confession should be thrown out. They also argued Skibicki should be found not criminally responsible due to mental disorder, specifically undiagnosed schizophrenia, claiming he had been experiencing delusions that made him believe he was on a mission from God, and unable to understand his actions were morally wrong. Chief Justice Glenn Joyal rejected both arguments. He ruled that at no point during the interrogation did Skibicki suggest his mental health caused him to lack an operating mind, and in fact showed the opposite. He accepted the testimony of Crown forensic psychiatrist Dr. Gary Chamovitz over the defence's expert, finding that Chamovitz credibly testified that Skibicki had made up the delusions and that his actual motivation was racism and what the psychiatrist described as homicidal necrophilia. On July 11, 2024, Manitoba Court of King's Bench, Chief Justice Glenn Joyal found Jeremy Skibicki guilty on all 4 counts of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Skibicki sat staring straight ahead and showed no reaction. He was in grey jail-issue sweatpants and a t-shirt and had been sipping water from a small plastic cup while the judge spoke. The families of the victims had filled every available seat. Joyal said the facts of the case were, in his words, mercilessly graphic. He said it would be artificial and disingenuous not to acknowledge the grim reality of missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada, though that acknowledgement could not affect the legal decision itself. On August 28, 2024, Skibicki was sentenced to 4 concurrent life sentences with no possibility of parole for 25 years, the automatic sentence required by Canadian law for first-degree murder. He will be 62 years old at his first parole eligibility date. Rebecca Contois was 24. Morgan Harris was 39. Mercedes Myran was 26. Ashley Shingoose was in her 20s. The remains of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myran were found on February 26, 2025, at the Prairie Green landfill north of Winnipeg, following a search funded jointly by the federal and Manitoba governments at a cost of approximately $40 million. Harris was formally identified by police on March 7, 2025. Myran was identified on March 17, 2025. The remains of Ashley Shingoose have not been located. Cambria Harris, Morgan's daughter, had been searching for her mother since she disappeared in May 2022. She joined search groups, travelled to Ottawa and Montreal to advocate for the landfill search, and stood outside courts for years. When Skibicki was convicted, she was in the room. The grandmother of Mercedes Myran, Donna Bartlett, also attended the verdict and called Skibicki an evil monster. She said he had torn her family apart and ripped their souls to pieces, and that it would be there forever. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Wayne Adam Ford also confessed on camera, but unlike Skibicki, who surprised detectives mid-interrogation with an announcement, Ford walked into a California sheriff's office under his own power, pulled a severed body part from his jacket pocket, placed it on the counter, and told the deputy at the desk that what he was holding was just the tip of the iceberg. Case 9. Wayne Adam Ford, the killer with a conscience. Wayne Adam Ford was born on December 3, 1961, in Petaluma, California. He was the second son of Calvin Eugene Ford, an American father, and Birgette, a German immigrant mother. His parents divorced in 1971, when Wayne was 10 years old. After the split, his mother travelled the world for approximately 6 years, leaving both sons in the care of their father in Napa, California. Wayne and his father did not get along well, and his mother's prolonged absence is described by people close to him as something he never fully got over. He dropped out of high school and enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in January 1979 at the age of 17. He served 6 years, including a period in Okinawa, Japan, and was honorably discharged in 1985, though discharge records indicate his mental health had become a complicating factor in his service. During his time in the Marines, in November 1980, Ford was walking along a road near Irvine, California, when a drunk driver struck him. The impact was severe. He lost multiple teeth, his face swelled to nearly twice its normal size, and he remained in a coma for 9 days. Family members who knew him before and after the accident have consistently said his personality changed significantly following the injury. Beginning in 1983, he experienced escalating psychological problems that required several hospitalizations. He was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. He became controlling and increasingly volatile in relationships. His first marriage, to a woman named Kelly Pletcher, ended in divorce. His second marriage, to a woman named Elizabeth Alt, also collapsed. The couple had a son named Max, born in December 1995. Elizabeth moved out with Max in the summer of 1996 and filed for divorce, which became final in April 1998. A custody agreement gave Ford limited visitation, 1 week every 3 months and every other December. Ford moved into a travel trailer in Arcata in Humboldt County in far northern California and found work as a long-haul truck driver hauling lumber through California, Oregon, Nevada, and Arizona. He drove routes alone, at night, across long stretches of largely empty highway. He began spending money on sex workers and fell further into heavy drinking. He complained constantly to anyone who would listen that his ex-wife was blocking him from seeing Max. His own mother, Elizabeth Alt, later testified at trial that she had actually encouraged him to visit their son, and that Ford rarely showed up, had never bathed or fed the boy, and had changed his diaper only once. Ford had visited Max on his 2nd birthday, and that was, according to defense attorney Joseph Canty, the last time father and son were together. Ford showed a pumpkin patch photo of that visit to the jury at trial. Whatever the truth of the custody dispute, the rage Ford felt about it was real, documented, and building. He told authorities after his arrest that his anger toward his ex-wife had been growing every single day, and that what he did to the women he killed was an expression of that rage toward her. A prostitute who testified at his trial said Ford had choked her during sex, then stopped, pulled out a photograph of his ex-wife and their son, and cried. She said he told her it was revenge. On October 26, 1997, a duck hunter canoeing on the Ryan Slough near Eureka came across what he initially thought was a mannequin lying on the muddy bank. When he got closer, he realised it was a human torso. The arms, legs, and head had all been removed. The body was that of a woman between 18 and 25 years old, and she had been stabbed 27 times, cut down the centre, and her breasts removed. She had no name, no identity, and no face for law enforcement to trace. For more than 25 years, she remained listed officially only as a Jane Doe. In June 2023, the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit, working with the California Department of Justice DNA Lab and a private laboratory called Othram Inc., built a DNA profile from her remains, found a genealogical match, and confirmed her identity. Her name was Kerry Ann Cummings. She was 25 years old. She had been kept for nearly a year by Ford in a freezer inside his Airstream trailer in Arcata, before he moved her remains to a hole at the base of a tree near the Mad River, just days before he turned himself in. Ford killed Tina Renee Gibbs, 26, on May 16, 1998, near Las Vegas. Gibbs was originally from Tacoma, Washington, and had been working as a street prostitute in Las Vegas in the months before she disappeared. Her nude body was found on June 2, 1998, floating in the California Aqueduct near the small town of Buttonwillow in Kern County. Autopsy confirmed she had been strangled. In September 1998, Lynette Dayon White, 25, a resident of Fontana, California, left her home to go to the grocery store to get milk for her baby. She was last seen near a truck stop in Ontario. On September 25th, 3 men driving a truck pulled into a gravel turnout off State Highway 12 near Lodi in San Joaquin County and found a woman's nude body in an irrigation ditch beside the road. Nearby investigators found women's clothing, a bloodied tarp, hair samples, pieces of jewellery, and a white plastic bag bearing the logo of a Flying J truck stop. The body was identified as Lynette White. She had been dead for several days. On October 22, 1998, Patricia Ann Tamez, 29, of Hesperia, California, spent the afternoon soliciting sex from truckers at the intersection of 6th and D Streets in Victorville. A man in a large black truck picked her up. The following evening, security guards patrolling the California Aqueduct near a pump house in San Bernardino County noticed something in the water. They called police. Officers pulled out the nude body of a woman. An autopsy revealed she had been bound, raped, struck in the head with a blunt object, had her back broken, been strangled, and had one breast surgically removed before her body was placed in the water. A bloodied towel, blouse, pants, and a .22 caliber air pistol were found upstream. The body was identified as Patricia Ann Tamez. There was no suspect. After killing Tamez, Ford told investigators and later said publicly that he began listening to Bible cassettes on his long drives, prayed more, and thought about suicide with increasing frequency. He described being terrified of himself, not because of guilt in the way that word is usually understood, but because he recognized the anger toward his ex-wife was escalating, and he was convinced that if he did not stop, he would kill her next, and his son would be left with no parents. He knew he had to stop. He just did not stop on his own. On November 2nd, 1998, Ford called his older brother, Calvin Rodney Ford, known to the family as Rod, from a payphone at the Ocean Grove Lodge in Trinidad, California, after a day of drinking. He told Rod he had hurt some people real bad. Rod spent hours trying to get more out of him, could not, and eventually went to bed. The next morning, Rod pressed harder. Wayne said enough that Rod understood something serious had happened and told him that if he had hurt people, he had to go to the police. On the evening of November 3rd, 1998, Wayne and Rod walked together into the Humboldt County Sheriff's Department main station in Eureka, California. Wayne told the deputy at the front desk that he had some evidence. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed Ziploc bag. Inside it was Patricia Tamez's severed breast. He had preserved it. He had been carrying it. He placed it on the counter and told the deputy it was just the tip of the iceberg. When Humboldt County Sheriff Dennis Lewis was asked afterward to describe Ford's demeanor when he walked in, he said Ford was remorseful and had apparently reached a point where he needed to talk about what he had been involved in. Detectives brought Ford in for questioning that night. He broke down crying and gave him a full account of 4 murders: Kerry Ann Cummings, Tina Renee Gibbs, Lynette White, and Patricia Tamez. He described where he had killed each woman, how he had disposed of their remains, and why he believed he had done it. He told investigators that the anger was almost all directed at his ex-wife, and that he had become more afraid of what he would do to her every single day. In a 3.5-hour interview conducted just before his arraignment, he also told investigators the location of Kerry Ann Cummings's missing head, which he said he had buried in the channel of the Mad River near his trailer. He directed them to the campsite where he had hidden additional body parts. He disclosed where to find body parts he had stored in the freezer of his Airstream. He gave investigators everything. Humboldt County Coroner Frank Jaeger Jr., who spoke to Ford before his arraignment on November 6, 1998, told reporters that Ford said he was ashamed of what he was doing and that he turned himself in because he was afraid that if he did not, he would kill his ex-wife and his son would be an orphan. Criminologist Mike Rustigan of San Francisco State University, speaking to the Associated Press in 1998, said Ford's self-surrender was, in his assessment, truly an exception in the annals of serial killers. The legal process that followed was complicated. Ford's crimes had taken place across multiple California counties, and the question of where and how to try him took years to work out. His case became one of the first test cases under a California law that allowed multiple murders in different jurisdictions to be consolidated into a single trial. Multiple pre-trial hearings stretched through the early 2000s. A portion of his confession was ruled inadmissible in 2004 because he had asked for an attorney at one point during the interview and the questioning had continued, but the ruling did not end the case. The trial itself opened in San Bernardino County Superior Court in March 2006, with Judge Michael A. Smith presiding. Defense attorneys Joseph Canty and Steve Mapes argued that Ford was a broken man, driven to violence by a head injury, mental illness, a collapsing marriage, and the loss of access to his son. They said he had a conscience, which was why he turned himself in and gave detectives every detail they asked for. Prosecutor David Mazurek argued that Ford knew exactly what he was doing and knew it was wrong. On June 27, 2006, the jury convicted Wayne Adam Ford of 4 counts of first-degree murder. The jury deliberated for more than a week. 3 jurors said afterward they did not accept the mental illness defense and noted that an emotional outburst Ford had in the courtroom during the testimony of Patricia Tamez's father, Rudolfo Tamez, had significantly affected their view of him. Juror Darlena Murray, a teacher, told reporters the jury concluded that self-gratification was all they could identify as a motive. The jury credited Rod Ford for convincing his brother to turn himself in. On August 11, 2006, the jury recommended death. On March 16, 2007, Superior Court Judge Brian McCarville formally imposed the death sentence. Ford was sent to death row at San Quentin State Prison in California, where he remains as of 2025. Kerry Ann Cummings was identified in June 2023, more than 25 years after she was killed. Her family was located through genealogical DNA matching. The Humboldt County Sheriff said at the time that while nothing could take away the pain of loss, they hoped the identification could bring some measure of resolution to her family. The sheriff credited investigators who never gave up on her case across more than 2 decades. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Wayne Ford was the only killer in this entire series who walked into a police station before investigators knew his name. Every other man in this series was caught, arrested, found out, or worn down until they confessed. Ford came in on his own, placed the evidence on the counter himself, and told them everything. San Francisco State University's Rustigan called it an exception in the annals of serial killers, and he was right. Whether that makes Ford's crimes any less brutal is a separate question entirely. The families of 4 women who never came home would have their own answer. Case 10. Ted Bundy, The Last Confession. On the evening of January 23, 1989, inside Florida State Prison in Rayford, a man sat down in front of a video camera with psychologist and Christian broadcaster James Dobson and spent over an hour on tape admitting to mass murder. Outside the prison, crowds had already begun to gather. Teenagers held signs reading, "Burn, Bundy, burn." More than 300 reporters were camped outside, waiting for news of the execution scheduled for the following morning. The man they were there to witness die had specifically refused to speak with any of them. Instead, he had asked an attorney to contact Dobson and request this one final interview. It was the day before his death, and Ted Bundy had something specific he wanted to say while a camera was still running. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, at a home for unwed mothers in Burlington, Vermont. His mother was 22-year-old Eleanor Louise Cowell. His father was never conclusively identified. The family's shame over the illegitimate birth meant that for the first several years of his life, Ted was raised by his grandparents in Philadelphia as if he were their son. His mother was presented to him as his older sister. He did not know until some time later that the woman he called his sister was actually the woman who had given birth to him. In 1950, Eleanor moved with Ted to Tacoma, Washington, where she met and married a hospital cook named Johnny Bundy, who adopted the boy and gave him his last name. Bundy later described his childhood as normal and his stepfather dismissively, not very bright, not making much money. What he did not describe was the version of his childhood that other sources paint differently. His maternal grandfather as a violent, abusive man who beat family members with little provocation, a home environment the family worked hard to present as stable while cracks ran through the foundation. He was shy in school, bullied, but developed socially as he aged. At the University of Washington, he fell in love with a wealthy, poised young woman from California, a student with dark hair and a certain social confidence that he found compelling. When she ended the relationship, telling him she did not see a future in it, the rejection hit him at a depth that people who knew him later said he never recovered from. He left school, drifted, then worked his way back up with uncommon determination. He got himself back into the University of Washington, graduated with a degree in psychology, worked on Republican political campaigns in Washington, got a glowing letter of recommendation from the Republican governor, and was accepted to law school. He was also, by then, killing women. His first confirmed murder is the February 1974 attack on 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy, a University of Washington student, whom he bludgeoned in her basement apartment, abducted, and killed. Her skull was later found at a site called Taylor Mountain, east of Seattle, where investigators would eventually find the remains of 4 Bundy victims. He killed Donna Gail Manson, 19, in March 1974. Susan Elaine Rancourt, 18, in April. Roberta Kathleen Parks, 20, in May. Brenda Carol Ball, 22, in June. Georgianne Hawkins, 18, in June. On July 14, 1974, at Lake Sammamish State Park near Seattle, witnesses saw a man in an arm sling calling himself Ted ask multiple women for help carrying a sailboat to his car. He took Janice Ann Ott, 23, who agreed to help him. She was never seen alive again. He came back to the park that same day and took Denise Nasland, 19. Their remains were found months later near Issaquah. His method was consistent. He drove a tan Volkswagen Beetle. He approached women in public places, parks, university campuses, shopping malls, late-night parking lots, and presented himself as safe. He sometimes wore a fake cast or sling on his arm to trigger sympathy. He sometimes posed as a police officer. He sometimes simply talked to women until they trusted him enough to walk with him toward his car. Then he bludgeoned them, restrained them with handcuffs, drove them to remote locations, raped them, and strangled them. He returned to the bodies afterward, sometimes for weeks, until decomposition made it impossible. In late 1974, he moved to Salt Lake City to enroll at the University of Utah's law school. Young women began disappearing in Utah. On November 8, 1974, he approached 18-year-old Carol Durant at a shopping mall in Murray, Utah, presenting himself as Officer Roseland and telling her someone had tried to break into her car. He drove her toward what he said was the police station. In the car, he tried to put handcuffs on her and hit her with a crowbar. She grabbed the door handle and threw herself out of the moving vehicle. She ran. She survived. She described him to police. On the same evening, 17-year-old Debbie Kent vanished from the parking lot of a high school in the town of Bountiful, Utah, where Bundy had been seen earlier in the evening. Her remains were never fully recovered. He killed women in Colorado as well. He killed in Idaho. In June 1977, facing a murder trial in Colorado, he escaped from the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen by jumping from a second-floor window and walking into the mountains. He was recaptured 8 days later. In December 1977, he escaped again from the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, by removing a ceiling panel, crawling through the space above and across to the jailer's apartment, dressing in street clothes he found there, and walking out the front door in the early morning hours. He was not discovered missing for 17 hours. He made his way to Florida. On January 15, 1978, he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University in Tallahassee between 2 and 3 in the morning. He beat 5 women in their beds. Lisa Levy, 20, and Margaret Bowman, 21, died. 3 others survived with injuries ranging from broken bones to skull fractures. Bundy bit one of the victims so severely on her left buttock that the dental impression would later be used in court to connect him to the crime. He drove to another woman's apartment nearby that same night and beat her too, fracturing her skull. She survived. On February 9, 1978, he abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from the grounds of her junior high school in Lake City, Florida, raped her, murdered her, and left her body in a state park more than 30 miles away. On February 15, 1978, he was stopped for a traffic violation in Pensacola and arrested under a false name. The officer ran the plates and found the car stolen. His true identity was confirmed, and he was in custody for the last time. He was convicted in July 1979 of the murders of Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman at the Chi Omega house and sentenced to death. He was convicted in 1980 of the murder of Kimberly Leach and sentenced to death a second time, and then a third. He spent nearly a decade on death row appealing his sentences, maintaining his innocence throughout, conducting his own legal defense at times, acting as his own attorney in courtroom appearances that drew crowds who found his intelligence and looks striking. He married Carol Ann Boone in 1980 during his second trial, exploiting a Florida statute that allowed a verbal declaration in open court to constitute a legal marriage. Boone believed completely in his innocence. She had a daughter with him, Rosa, while he was on death row, through means that were never officially confirmed. She eventually stopped visiting him and moved back to Washington with Rosa after he began confessing. As his final execution date of January 24, 1989 approached, and his last appeals were exhausted, Bundy began talking. He gave a confession to Washington State investigator Robert Keppel, with whom he had ironically consulted years earlier from death row, offering his insights on the psychology of the then unidentified Green River Killer. Now Bundy was confessing his own crimes to Keppel, describing 11 murders in Washington State, naming additional unknown victims in Washington and Oregon, whom he could not or would not fully identify. He described locations. He drew on maps. He told investigators where he had left the remains of George Ann Hawkins. He said he had incinerated the head of one victim in his then-girlfriend's fireplace in Seattle. He had simply run out of time before he ran out of confessions. On January 23, 1989, the afternoon and evening before the morning of his execution, Bundy sat down with James Dobson. The camera was running throughout. Dobson, then 52, was a psychologist and the founder of Focus on the Family, a Christian non-profit organization. Bundy had specifically requested him by name. During the interview, which lasted over an hour and was recorded in full, Bundy described his path to violence as beginning with his discovery of pornographic magazines as a teenager. He said he had found them at a dump near his home at around age 13. He told Dobson that exposure to increasingly violent pornography had hardened his fantasies, and that alcohol had further dissolved whatever barriers existed between fantasy and action. He wept during parts of the interview. He told Dobson he felt remorse. Dobson later wrote that Bundy had seemed genuinely calm and in a state of peace about what was coming. The interview was released publicly by Focus on the Family as a documentary titled Fatal Addiction and has been widely viewed. In it, at one point, the lights in the interview room flickered. Bundy paused and said to Dobson to wait a moment and they would come back on. He told Dobson he knew what it was. The prison was testing the electric chair that would be used on him in approximately 12 hours. Whether Bundy was genuinely remorseful or whether the interview was, as his former friend and true crime writer Ann Rule later described it, an 11th hour con game, the final performance of a man who had been performing his entire life, remains a matter of genuine dispute. Rule believed Bundy wanted two things from the interview: an audience and a way to shift blame from himself onto something external. By blaming pornography, he made himself a victim of a force outside himself, which was the last version of the story he wanted to leave behind. Former FBI agent Bill Hagmaier, who had spent considerable time with Bundy on death row and was present at some of his final confessions, said that the confession was ultimately a ploy to buy more time, and that Bundy had simply run out of road before he ran out of things to reveal. At approximately 7 a.m. on January 24, 1989, Bundy was strapped into the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Leather restraints were tightened across his arms, legs, waist and chest. A metal skull cap was bolted to his head. A thick leather strap was pulled across his mouth and chin. He had called his mother Louise twice the night before. She told him on the second call that he would always be her precious son. His last spoken words, directed to his attorney and to the minister who had counselled him overnight, were, "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." The switch was thrown. Outside the prison, the crowd of more than 1,000 people cheered. Some banged frying pans. Some set off fireworks. A fraternity at Florida State University held a cookout serving items they called Bundy burgers. They had a banner that read, "Watch Ted fry, see Ted die." A Florida State trooper named Ken Robinson, who witnessed the execution, told reporters afterward that Bundy had an easier death than any of his victims. Bundy confessed to 30 murders before he died, in addition to the 3 he was convicted of in Florida. The true number of his victims is unknown and remains disputed. He killed women in Washington, Oregon, Utah, Idaho, Colorado, and Florida. Many investigators believe the total is higher than 30. Some believe it is significantly higher. He took the full truth with him. In March 2026, DNA evidence confirmed that Bundy had killed 17-year-old Laura Ann Amy, who had disappeared from a Halloween party in Utah in October 1974. She had been listed as an unconfirmed victim for more than 50 years. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.